This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not provided as financial, legal, or any other advice. The information is not investment advice or an offer to buy or sell any securities or make any investment. The views expressed by guest speakers are their own, and any reference to third-party products, services, or information does not constitute an endorsement thereof by SNN or its affiliates. SNN expressly disclaims all liability for any individual's use of the information presented in this podcast.
My guest on the show today is John Givens, CEO of VirTra. It's a publicly traded company. The symbol is VTSI on NASDAQ. VirTra is a global provider of judgmental use of force training simulators and firearms training simulators for the law enforcement, military, educational, and commercial markets. The company's patented technologies, software, and scenarios provide intense training for de-escalation, judgmental use of force, marksmanship, and related training that mimics real-world situations. I first heard VirTra's presentation, I believe as far back as 2014 or 2015, at one of Ian Cassel's MicroCapClub investor summits, which I'll be attending again this year in Idaho. And since my first introduction to the story, the company has a new CEO, John Givens, who I invited on to discuss the history of VirTra and what he's accomplished since taking over as CEO, challenges the company faced over the last couple of years and how John overcame them, competitive landscape and better understanding of their military and law enforcement customer base, and John's 3 to 5 year vision for the company. With that, please enjoy my conversation with John Givens, CEO of VirTra.
First, well, John, thank you so much for joining me. This is really cool because, look, VirTra has been on my white whale list of companies to have on due diligence series for a while now. And, with everything that's been going on in the company, I figured now is as good a time as ever probably to introduce the company to folks that haven't heard the VirTra story before, but also to give folks kind of the holistic view of how you got to where you are today and also potentially where you're going. So with that, as we start off on this podcast with every CEO that I have on here, can you give us that one line that best describes VirTra?
Yeah, that's easy. VirTra's training solution provider of judgmental use of force, de-escalation, and decision-making simulation.
Easy, simply put. Gotta love it. All right, now let's start with the company's history. When was the company originally founded, and what was the original thesis for its founding?
Yeah, the story is really interesting. So Bob Ferris founded the company in 1993, and he founded it in the fun zone, is what I'd like to call it, in the entertainment industry. So he was creating VR headset rides for Universal and some other folks that needed some interaction. And then he did that for quite some time, and then 9/11 hit. And I can imagine, knowing Bob Ferris the way I do, I can see him sitting in a quiet corner going, this is just a horrible tragedy. What can we do? The technology that we have right now at our fingertips that we've been playing around in the amusement industry, how can we apply that to help our first responders, our law enforcement, our military? And that's when VirTra did the massive switch and started applying the technology that had been built towards training law enforcement in scenario-based simulations.
Absolutely. So when I first heard of the company, I think it was at it must have been at a MicroCapClub leadership summit. Shout out to Ian and the crew over there at MicroCapClub. And I remember the one thing that drew me to it at the time that I thought was quite interesting as a potential tailwind. And I think that's probably what will at least catch us up to at that point in the company's history, was that, unfortunately, we have lots of school shootings, unwanted deaths when in the training process or in trying to subdue a situation or de-escalate a situation. So VirTra came in as like, we have all this virtual reality training seminars or training programs that we can work with both police enforcement, with potentially with the Army now, and the military. You'll probably speak more to that can help with the training process so that officers are more equipped when these situations come up. So correct me if I'm wrong, if I've missed anything there in terms of what the tailwind or the actual technology or the product and service itself.
No, I think the interview's over.
Interview's over, right?
That was
Done.
perfect, Bobby. That was
Cut.
perfect. You nailed it. You nailed it.
We'll catch us up to today. You know, obviously, I at that presentation was Bob Ferris that did that presentation. You came on as co-CEO. I think you said a couple years ago now. You know, now you're full-time CEO. So maybe a little bit about your background and catching us up to where the company is at today.
Yeah, I've been in the military and been a defense vendor for many, many years. So serving and then serving in the military and then serving those that serve to keep them out of harm's way. So originally I was with Bohemia Interactive Simulations, and we have gaming technology, and I founded Bohemia Interactive Simulations Inc. in Orlando. And that's kind of the epicenter for all simulation and training in all branches of the military. And we had programs of record in the Army, the Marine Corps, in every branch of service, in every country that you can think of. And we were taking the gaming technology and creating scenarios and doing training to keep folks out of harm's way. And it's all about the repetition, right? So that's where I started. And I've known Bob for about 15 years. And he's always been trying to get me to come, but I was locked into that company till it sold in 2022. I'll take one step back. Bob had a board of director, one of his board members had passed away, and he said, "John, can you serve on my board?" So I had to go and make sure that our private equity firm was okay with that. So I came on the board of VirTra in, I forget what month, but it was in 2020. I mean, it was November of 2020. And I served on the board for 2 years. And then Bohemia sold to British Aerospace Engineering, BAE, for $200 million and they closed the deal in March of 22. And then I left the company, I think it was like March 6th, and Bob convinced me to take a co-CEO role. He'd been working on me. So like 4 days later, I had 4 days of retirement. 4 days later, I was co-CEO. The original was for me to come on and help with the military, start an Orlando office and, start the military division, if you will, or military sales. And I came to the office in Arizona for 3 months. And Bob's brilliant at what he does in the engineering, but the back end operation really needed some help. So we bought a building, did about 13 construction jobs, brought everything together, did upgrades, and restructured the company and put things into functional area so that I would be comfortable and proud bringing my customers to the company and the product, putting together QA departments and all of that. Just a lot of things, redesigning of some products. I mean, just been a lot of things going on. And just wrapping my hands around it. And what really enticed me was that it did need it. Some areas was in disrepair, and it was a challenge. So that's the reason why I came to the company, and I've been digging in ever since. So I'm quite sure there's not a question you can ask me in any detail that I won't be able. I've run machines, I've swept floors, I've looked at, I've pulled inventory, we've redone systems. I mean, it's ERP was totally revamped. When I got here, my first task was to clear 3 red flags on the NASDAQ and keep the company from being delisted. And so I was head down doing that, and then hiring a CFO. And I mean, I could go through a litany of things, but for me, it was fun. For a shareholder, probably if they'd have known, it probably would have not been something they would have stomached well. But I will say that the company is firing on all cylinders. And now in the CEO role, I've been, since I was co-CEO, Bob's given lots of leverage. He has, he's kind of transitioned co-CEO, then to executive board chair, and, wherever his plans are in that. But the day-to-day and everything I've been running now for 1 full year, but in the background for 2 years because we were cleaning things up. So that's kind of the background. Myself and all my team that I put together are all, they get their hands dirty. I mean, they're working managers. They're, and I don't need anybody floating around pointing out things. I need them to get in there and dig and get it done. So, that's kind of that's kind of the story, I guess, the evolution, if you will.
Quick follow up to that. Firstly, I also want to address that Bob Ferris is probably one of the nicest people I've ever met.
One of the nicest.
There's no, I
No, him and I are. I won't say I'm not nice, but I'm very blunt, very to the point. Get it done. You know, I was in the Army, and
yeah.
and you know, you kind of learn a certain way of doing things. So I think that's what Bob needed. He needed somebody opposite of his personality to just get in there and get it done.
For sure.
But yeah, bar none, one of the kindest men I've ever seen, unassuming. And I will tell you this, people questioned when we became co-CEOs together, people questioned whether that would work. If they knew him and myself together and the mutual respect we had for each other, I don't think there was never an argument. There was, I think, one item we had a disagreement on, but it was just opinions going back and forth until we both came to a resolution, but nothing like what you've heard in the past. And I'd tell you, it's been a wonderful experience. I don't think I'd ever done that with anybody else, though, be quite frank.
Listen, we got to give Bob some flowers on that one, right? Like
100%.
I had that memory. I only met him a couple times, and each time he's been very nice.
Yeah, very kind person.
So speaking to the challenges, you know, in getting to this point, you said there was numerous in cleaning things up and whatnot. But what would you say of all the challenges that you experienced in getting the company to the point where it is at today, as you say, you know, a lot firing on all cylinders and flex points, all that kind of stuff. What would you say was that one challenge that you were like, well, man, this is roll the sleeves up time, like, and how'd you overcome it?
I know you're not going to like the answer, but I mean, I kind of describe it, if I have to put an analogy, I describe it as if you have a 10-foot ceiling and I said, Bobby, I need you to change that light bulb, and all you have is 1 foot by 1 foot blocks. What do? You lay down a layer, you skip one block, you lay down another layer, and you build yourself some stairs. The problem is you were missing blocks on the first floor, first level, the second level, the third level, the fourth level. So you couldn't tackle too many things in parallel because everything was dependent on what you did on the layer before. Nice. So I know you wanted one thing, but the problem is we didn't have the right people in the right places. We were focused because we had no financial visibility because the ERP was poorly implemented. That was major. So you had no visibility. You can't manage what you don't see or monitor, right? It was horrible. We weren't getting, I came in and we had customers that hadn't received their orders for 2 years. The average was 12 to 14 months. We had customers that were mad, you know, because they hadn't gotten it. And products weren't 100% inspected, so we had no QA. We had functional areas that reported to the wrong place that made no sense. So, I mean, I really can't point to one thing. I would say one thing that was most disruptive in the entire company that had to be fixed was when you take an order, like from the quote to the PO, right? That's great, but you take the PO and you have to build a sales order so everybody in the company can do their job. That was broken. And so the simple fact that you couldn't get a PO and what was ordered delivered, I mean, I'm talking about pulled out of inventory, invoiced, customer support knowing what it was, where it was. I mean, the entire thing, the ERP was an absolute disaster. And so one of the biggest milestones and the amazing thing that the team has done, and let's just be clear, I want to be the dumbest person in the company. I've got a phenomenal team. And while I think sometimes I'm Superman and can get it done, there is no way I could have done anything in this company without their dedication, loyalty, and their hard drive. We had some great people in the company that just needed guidance and mentoring. And man, they jumped on that train. The saying was, which was kind of funny, again, Bob Ferris being the nicest person you ever wanted to meet in the entire world. John comes in with the military operations background and conflict background, and you had to really to fix it. It was get on the train, get out of the way, or get run over, because we were making this happen. I laid down the mission, everybody rallied behind it, and you saw good things based on what happened in 2023. Now, I will say the only way that happens in an organization is my philosophy. Everything that's happened to this company in 31 years is John Givens' fault. And you might say, well, you weren't even here. It doesn't matter. I am at fault for everything because if I don't take the ownership, it doesn't get done. And that's the model and the mantra that everybody within the company assumes. Because if you think about it, if you're in a debate with somebody, if you just say, yeah, that's all my fault, I should have done better, that is over. And now you're working towards a solution. Yeah. So if John Givens takes the responsibility for everything in the entire company, then now we're going towards a solution. And that's where I want to be anyways. So I don't have an ego that has to be right or prove that someone's wrong. So that was a big key success to moving forward. And so in 6 months, we implemented 100% an entire ERP system with Epicor. And since then, we've gotten lots of visibility and we're able to fine tune and tweak the things. So the next question you might say is, well, what's that one thing you had to fix? Well, how about the one mistake that John thinks he made in the last 2 years? And that might have been, maybe I should have fixed the sales department earlier. But the problem with that is I had a backlog of 26 million and unhappy customers. So I wanted to focus on the back end. And so, Bobby, take a guess. How long do you think an average, I kind of gave you a clue. What do you think the average was from the times we got a PO to the time the customer got their goods and installed?
I mean, you kind of gave it away earlier in the interview. I think you said it was about, what, 2 years? Before
I'd say it was an average about a year.
Okay.
So with the hard work that these folks have done, what do you think it is today? And that's important when you start looking at the bookings to revenue ratio instead of the revenue based on the backlog, right? So backlog to bookings, it used to be 95% backlog and 5% bookings. Well, we've kind of flipped the apple cart. So in a great world, going from 12 months to what? Like, what would you guess would be good in the industry for what we do, hardware, software?
I mean, for what you guys do, I don't know, 6 months, 4 to 6 months.
Yeah, 4 to 7 days. 4 to 7 days. That's why you'll see now the ratio should be 90, probably 80% bookings and 20% backlog. So and that's monumentous when you start talking about where the company was and where we are today to have that kind of turn that quickly. And that's why you saw first quarter numbers dip, is because we burnt the entire backlog off. And I'm sure you have a question later is what are investors confused about, but that'll be the one I'll talk about is backlog. But yeah, so getting back to that, I don't know if I made the mistake, because if I'd have kept piling on sales, I'd have been in a spot where I could have never recovered.
Well, do you think that will normalize now, like as you get in more POs? Like, all right, it's 80-20 now, but like as we get more POs, like, okay, that's probably going to go to, 50-50, 60-40, something like that.
Yeah. We'll start, as we start increasing our step contracts, it's basically a lease, and then the capital expense. We've got a good balance and a good plan strategy of where we're going there. We're starting to see all that come to fruition, and we're starting to see the sales team start to kick on all cylinders. That was the other thing, is the sales team, territorial structure wasn't efficient, and I don't know that we had all the right people in place, but they definitely didn't have guidance. We had some great people, but they didn't have the guidance to get them where they needed in the territories and the incentive. And that goes back to the leadership in the company, is that they didn't recognize that you have to incentivize. I want my salesmen to make more money than I make. Good Lord, I want them to. And we put a sales structure. I always say this, the sales team at VirTra is blessed to have a CEO that knows how to sell and came out of selling. The sales department is also at a real deficit because they have a CEO that came from sales and knows sales, right? So all the excuses and all the things don't happen. So I think they've realized that we put in place a sales methodology, and now they're starting to act. Remember, we expanded our territories. We had like 5 or 6 salesmen. Now we have 11. I think we have 10. We have one position open. And Of those, 8 of them were brand new. So we've got some real industry. We've got some folks from the industry that are just crushing it. And I think you'll see those results in the numbers going forward.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, growth markets, your target markets that you're looking to go after. Obviously, from my experience and understanding VirTra back in the day, it was really on working with various, police forces. Military was kind of there, but that was like kind of the carrot at the end of the treadmill, if you will, right? But
Yeah.
now it sounds like now with you in there, now it's almost, I don't want to give a percentage, you could probably give it to me, but military is a high focus area for the company right now. So can you give us an overview about target markets, how you're, I guess maybe some a little bit of market penetration there as well?
Yeah, I'll do that, but I want to give a little bit of explanation on those markets. People
Sure,
use
please.
all kinds of terms. They'll call it lumpy, they'll call it, sporadic or whatever they want to call it. But let me tell you how I view that. I've been in that space for a very long time. And I tried to get into the LE market. So kudos to VirTra and everybody that was working to get in there, because you spend a lot of time on what I'd call lower dollar, 300,000, 100,000, 300,000 versus the multi-million-dollar contracts that you can get in the military. And sometimes the timelines are the same. Maybe the military is a little bit longer. But what I will tell you is how I look at that is, as we start to get military contracts, let's just say, if you just say $1 million a year, let's say you get a contract for $1 million a year. I call it a step function. So now you have $1 million a year and you're going to get that for 5 years, right? So you now have a baseline of $1 million for that year for that military contract. And you're still driving all your law enforcement contracts, right? So that kind of fills in the gap. Now, next year, we get another contract for $1 million. So there goes that step. Now I'm at $2 million a year just in 2 government contracts, and I'm still driving my law enforcement. So you'll see this step function as you start to travel up that line. And then as contracts hit their 5-year marks or their expiration, you need to start filling those gaps. The problem with that in the military is that there's a cycle where they go out and perform the competition and all of that. They might have a bridge contract, but the bottom line is you have to compete and get in there. And then sometimes after 5 years, they want fresh blood in there. So then you do a partnership with another prime contractor. So there's a whole new world there. Law enforcement is much, much harder because in the military, you have acquisition corps where you're going to one place. It doesn't matter where the branch or where they are around the country, you're dealing with that contract. So in my opinion, humble opinion, because I've done it for so long, that's very easy. The hard part is hitting every city, every county, every state, every other federal government agency, because those are different people in every places with different rules and different laws. And so that becomes quite a bit of work and dedication in building those relationships. So from that perspective, it's 2 different functioning entities doing the same thing in training. But here's what I'll say. Coming from Bohemian in the game-based industry, video training for law enforcement is great because they're doing situational awareness, Hollywood type stuff, and you train that way and we're coming out with new stuff. The problem is those take some time to build. Now, the team here has cut down the time. Like I gave them a challenge of 5 scenarios a quarter. They're knocking it out of the park. They're getting new technologies, and they know that nothing is ever good enough for John. Even if they make some stretch goal, we're off to the next goal, just driving them. And they like that. They're engaged and they're contributing. And so those are the things that drive the team. The one thing that is annoying to me in a lot of companies is they tout that their employees are their best asset. At VirTra, they are the best asset. I don't care what your product is and all that. They're going to make it better. And if you have happy employees, they're going to be happy when they're dealing with customers, not disgruntled or whatever. All that comes through in everything that we do. So I always tell everybody there's 3 things that we can give our employees. We give them the mission, the direction, and what has to be done. We give them the training, the resources, everything they need to get it done. And then we tell them the cog that they are, how does that drive the machine? So they know their value and their contribution. If a few teeth on that cog are broken, how's it going to affect the machine? But the loyalty, dedication, and all of that you have to earn from that employee, and then you have to foster that, and that drives your company. And that's where we are. If you want to talk about inflection points, that's one of the best things going on for VirTra right now is our employees are engaged. They talk about and they solve problems together, and they're focused on the mission. So the mission is most important to everybody in the company. Is, we've over and over again, we get email and testimonials about if I wasn't in the VirTra system and I didn't go through that scenario, I wouldn't have went home to dinner to my wife tonight. That's why we're here.
Wow. Thank you for that whole explanation.
That whole rant.
Yeah, the rant.
I love what I do. I love what I do.
I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go run a marathon with a VirTra shirt right now. I love it. But so another question I do have, because we're talking about virtual reality. I think a lot of folks might be thinking to themselves, okay, interesting technology. You're building out scenarios that are going to be unique to what VirTra is doing, but also these are scenarios that any other company should also probably keep in mind if they wanted to have similar technology to also sell to, whether it's military, municipalities, whatever. So what would you say is that main moat that protects the products and services that VirTra is going out there? And really what makes you guys unique and different compared to some of your peers out there that might be trying to do the same thing?
Look, 3 words: content is king. That's it.
Okay.
That's it. At Bohemia, that we had more content than anybody. We had an average game engine compared to some of the new stuff coming out. But nobody's going to jettison something if you can't give them the same level of training and content that you have. I mean, I'll tell you, anybody can go out and get projectors. Anybody can go out and get lasers and write some software to look at something at a screen. But none of that matters. This is what I tell people when they're giving presentations, when they're giving a demo, when they're training a soldier, a sailor, a Marine, law enforcement, or some agent. When they walk away or they get their butt up out of that seat, what are they taking with them? Because that's really the importance that any of these systems have, is what value are they going to get when they walk away? What have they learned? What new? So that's what makes it different. We've developed some technology in our content development, and they're continuing to drive that. We're doing research and development and applying new technology to do things faster, better, stronger. But in the end, what it boils down to is the content that you have for your customer base. How easy is it for them to create their own? How a lot of the contracts we get now, we'll do like a Hollywood production. We have a 3D capture studio, and I would maybe you can supply the link for them, Bobby, or what. But the green room that we have is one of the largest capture. It's a V3 capture studio, and it's video volumetric capture. So you'll see myself in there. They wanted to just capture me, and they'll do all kinds of stuff. And they'll drop me into a scene, and you're like, wow. And it's pretty quick. And that's the technology to be able to take to produce content much better. So, yeah.
Wait, John, are you sure that wasn't just your team be like, oh, she's driving us to make 10 more scenarios. I'm dropping into this next one. He's got
100%.
He's going to be.
No, I think what it is they take my character now.
He's going to be the kidnapper
and they get
now.
inside there and shoot it all day long. Hey, whatever you can do to get them to vent.
I love it. I think it's hilarious.
Yeah.
One other question, go back to market itself. And I think you kind of answered a little bit, but I was kind of maybe thinking a step further. And because I think about that a lot when it comes to even our business, is that, we create content for the core,
Yeah.
MicroCap audience, listener, what have you, and it seems like in your case, it seems like that's why also the military is so important, where it's like, if I got military buy-in for that, this is what they're using to train the soldiers in every different scenario. Why wouldn't any, police a municipality or even some of the academies say, well, this is good enough for the military. Like this should probably be good enough for us.
Yeah,
Correct?
I'll just be brutally honest, and you can edit it if you want.
No,
But
please don't.
there's two different ways to train, right?
Sure,
The
please.
mil- what do you what
I
do
don't
you
know. I
do in the
wasn't in the military.
military? The military is you neutralize a threat. You
Right.
go in there, you stack 2 by 2, 3 by 3, and you take out whatever is in your path. Police officers can't do that. Look at the scrutiny that they're under. There's all kinds of things that they have to apply. Some of them don't pull a trigger because they don't know what the ramifications will be on the other end.
I guess I should clarify in terms of the technology, right? Like they'll probably know that you have simulations for that are different, right? For police and also for military purposes. I'm just saying, I guess I should have clarified that is that police should see like, all right, if this technology and these training seminars, which they have customized ones for police as well, is good enough for the military, then this training tech should also be good for us too. That's what I kind of meant to say.
Yeah, I think there is that. There's a crossover.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that there's a vast number of audiences and a vast number of requirements and a vast number of missions. So a lot of times, if they don't see it applied to their mission or their area, it's hard for them to make the leap. That's kind of what I've seen. But you're right. I mean, we have our stuff in the military police, if you will, between all branches. They're already using it. As we announced before, we're on the IVAS program where they're using our recoil kits and our magazines, but not the other systems. So we have a technology that, a different revenue stream that comes just from the recoil kits. But yeah, we do see that. You see that cross pollination, and clearly you see it because what you might once I tell you it's common sense, but folks get out of the military, and there's a high number of folks that go into law enforcement after they're done with the military. So they bring some of the knowledge of the systems, small arms weapons trainers and decision making trainers that they've had in the military. They bring them to the career in law enforcement.
Got it. Hey, John, one other thing in terms of revenue streams, I remember this, I think maybe it was in 2014, 2015. And I'm just curious if this vertical is still around, kind of a Top Golf version of VirTra, where like it becomes a virtual reality, hangout center where you can, using powered by VirTra's tech, you can go in, have food, drinks, and, you have your own virtual reality room where you can do various scenarios and whatnot. Is that still something that the company is or is looking to do, or is that
The company's not doing it, and
okay?
I think we need to. My opinion on that is that we need to focus on our core market right now. We have a
Okay.
core market of law enforcement, and we can do a lot more there. And then we have this brand new wide open in the military that we need to focus on. And look, if we focus on those and saturate the market, I mean, we're going to be doing amazing. We are now, but it just gets that much better. The problem with consumer going into the consumer market is that you have to lower the cost so much, and the paybacks are a lot longer, and the people that pay the least require the most amount of your time. And so what that pulls away is from my IR&D to stay ahead of trends, new technologies, and the way to apply it. So there's got to be a balance. I believe the company tried it a couple of times and it wasn't that successful. I know they did it with Gander Mountain and it was going well, and then Gander sold out and there really wasn't anybody else. I don't know what the statistics are on that. I really didn't follow it. I just know about it because in Orlando, that was one of the largest installs at Gander Mountain. It was really impressive, but I don't know. I think the other thing I would probably caution is just the environment on weapons and like you had mentioned before, school shootings and the violence and domestic violence and all that. I don't know how that would be received, and it'd have to be a lot of market research on it before I want to tarnish the company or take away from our core market
Absolutely.
until we're 80% of ownership in that market.
Absolutely. And I totally appreciate all of that. It just came to me where I was like, wait, I remember they were doing something like this. So I had to ask. So You alluded to it earlier. You must have watched an interview or two that I've done on this before, but I asked this to every CEO on here. In your opinion, what would you say, even after maybe listening through all up until this point, or seeing the company's presentation, or maybe hearing one of your recent conference calls, what do investors maybe still get confused when thinking about VirTra?
Yeah, I think there's a couple, right? One is the cycle of a sale. You can get lucky, and because we're dealing with county commissioners, state legislators, it could be the city, the mayor, and the structures, and everything's different. It's a cycle to get through those. So I don't think they realize that it's not just a one and done. We have competition, and we do really well against competition, but our real competition is, we get law enforcement, everybody that's going to use it, at almost every demonstration. Yeah, I got to have it. Now starts the real. It's kind of like coming up with a product idea. That's the easiest. Getting it to market is the hardest. That's kind of the same analogy. Making the sale to the person that is going to use it is fairly easy. They see the value, they understand it. But going through that process, I don't think investors realize the amount of effort that takes and the time it takes. And because there's so many hands. The second part is, I don't think that they understand the backlog. The backlog was a big problem for me. That's why we separated it out. I said, wow, we got $26 million in backlog. So if I fix the back end and everything, we should be able to book $26 million this year. No, not really, because backlog is current sale that isn't fulfilled. So let's say someone buys a capital expense. So they out and outright buy a V300, and let's just say for the demonstration purposes, it's 300,000. They go and they do all. We went through all these bailiwicks, and now it's 300,000. Got it. Okay. While we're waiting to fulfill it, it's backlog, and that is something. If I fulfill it right away, I get the book 300,000. Now, if we sell a step contract, which is very simply put a lease, take that $300,000, and we don't do it this way, but just again for the example, 3 years, it's now $100,000 a year. Before all 3 years is backlog, but that last year, that first year is the only addressable, and that others goes for next year and the following year's payments, right? So, and then you have warranty on top of that. So the whole backlog bucket has a lot of things that could be spread out from 2024 through 2029 on some of these. So I don't think they understand that. And if I was an investor, when I looked at that, it kind of bothered me, because I'm like, oh yeah, they've got this big backlog. I don't like to have a lot of large backlog. What I want is very large amount of reoccurring revenue. And that's the part where it kind of gets confusing for some of the investors. We've got some very sophisticated investors, and that are incredibly knowledgeable, and some of them surprise me at the knowledge that they have in my old military space. And so kudos to them. We've got some really, really sophisticated and very smart investors, which I'm happy about. So.
And so, John, another question I also ask everybody on here is, in your opinion, we covered some of the tailwinds, what excites you about the business, and some of the I guess you'd say green space available that VirTra is now trying to capitalize on. But what would you also say are some of the company's downside risks outside of execution risk? That's a given for everybody, right? But is there anything that folks should be more aware of as well when it comes to understanding their risk assessment when looking at VirTra?
Not just towards. I'll try to answer the one just for VirTra, but for the industry as a whole is funding, right? So a lot of police departments rely on grants and match funding from the federal government. So what happened, kind of the perfect storm, is we're in the middle of putting all this together, and then a lot of the funding, the military contracts, and even some of the grants and some of the purchase orders that we had just stacked up at the door were ready to go, and then they went into continuing resolution. And what that means is continuing resolution, you can continue with the programs that were already approved for funding, but any new starts, if you haven't received funding for it before, those get put on hold. And you think, okay, well, no big deal, because as soon as they finish continuing resolution, we'll be able to just book it. No, because now they got to go back to the beginning and re-award it. So that just increases that cycle. That's the biggest risk to any company in the defense industry and that are dealing with folks that rely on federal funding. Specifically to VirTra, and I'll talk about a countermeasure to that, is defunding police, because usually the first thing that goes is training, right? Because it's an easy line item to just scratch off. It's like anything, you put a product out there, what's the last thing you do? Documentation and training, right? It's kind of the thing. You build software, it's the same thing. But I would say defunding the police at all, those are our biggest risks. Risk that a new technology comes out and we don't stay on top of it, keep our eye on the ball, and it undermines whether it's the logistics of what we support or it's a new technology that they can do cheaper, faster, stronger, better. Those are the basic things I think that any company, no matter what you talk about. But what VirTra's done to counter that, defund the police, and it doesn't matter. I don't want to be political, but I want to talk about our environment. There's an opinion that there's two different ways to police, right? Show of force, use of force, right? And the de-escalation and more of a community. Well, we believe a combination of both of those, or one or the other, depending on the area. We're not going to tell someone how to police their area or how not to, but we're going to supply the tools to meet that mission and that doctrine at which they are doing. So part of the reason why we came out, two reasons why we came out with a VXR headset is the VXR headset, it's not ready yet, the technology, to do the shoot, don't shoot, putting weapons in there and all that, because it introduces a lot of false trainings, negative training, because you're not holding your own weapon. You've got something on there and it's showing it inside the virtual environment. So, but there's a need for virtual training, and that's why we are training soft skills. So if you're not a fan of the use of force or force training, then de-escalation, like one of the examples I give best of all is autism is very misunderstood. And police officers are hypersensitive to a lot of things. They've got to keep their head on a swivel. They've got to monitor what's going around for them. They're always in a threat environment or a perceived threat environment. Otherwise, they'll lose their life. So they pull up in a driveway and there's somebody, they got to call for a disturbance of somebody throwing rocks into their yard. Someone with autism comes up in their driveway and they see some rocks. You got a perfect line on the driveway and they see that this is out of place. So they pick up the rocks and are getting them out of the way. So in their headspace, they know, okay, this is fine now. I've got perfect line, nothing's interruptive. And so the aggressive stance that someone with autism at different levels would turn and approach the law enforcement officer, he's trained that that's an aggressive stance, and now he's got a situation. Well, we try to train that and give them familiarity with working with them. And we're working with the different institutes that deal with autism and teach and come up with methodologies to put those inside of the headset. That's just one. So domestic violence, identifying key indicators when you come up on someone, situational awareness, all those things are beautiful in a headset. And so we're doing that. Plus, as the technology's changed and we can put weapons into it, and the big screens may start to minimize folks that don't have the space for it, we'll have a product that as soon as the weapons are introduced and technology changes, not only am I just stepping to the right into that lane, I'm now making a massive jump forward ahead of competition, because I also have all of the courses that VirTra has. Another differentiator is that we have certified courses. And every one of our courses that are certified have just recently been certified on our headset. So we have more certified courses on the headset than anybody out there in the market space.
Absolutely. No, John, that was great. That was a great answer to everything. This is kind of an out there question, but anybody that has software and deploying some hardware that then you can use the software on, I have to ask, is there an AI component to everything that you're doing, or maybe utilizing AI in order to create some efficiencies within the business that you're starting to implement or thinking about?
Yeah, and I'm being software engineer and CEO of a company. I've got this dichotomy in my head that just like, I need to do this. You can't do that. I think like everything else, it's a brand new frontier. And one of the things is if you're writing code or you're doing things like that and you're uploading it to have something looked at, now you've put your IP out there in the public space and you risk your IP being used somewhere else as part of the model that gets put together. So we're looking at those policies in that, but on the same time, we're using AI to help us with the creation of our content. One of the things I keep hearing is, well, you can use AI. So if a guy comes up to you and he starts saying stuff, you can do voice recognition. You can go down those paths rather than having somebody. And I start to say, well, that's all wonderful, but in everything that I hear, it escalates and nobody says anything. It just happens. So what good's that going to do? So, we're taking a look at it and we're seeing where it fits. But in our development of documentation, in our documentation of code, and our documentation on the product and how to do things, in some of our content development and cleaning, we've cut down weeks, not days, not hours, but weeks of development effort in getting our content to the market. And we've attributed that to our implementation of AI and a better understanding of those processes to automate those mundane tasks.
Very cool. All right, I got two more questions for you. And so next question here, the company has reported profitability, right? So curious as to what the company's plan is in order to maintain that profitability while also still focused on growth.
Well, that's the only way you should run a company. I don't sacrifice profits, and I want to grow maximum growth. And there's a bunch of different ways to do that. We talked about the technology. It's about staying in front, being a step ahead, and researching and listening to the people that are out there, our customer base, and listening to my staff internally. That I tell everybody, I don't know anything. These guys do these jobs every single day, and I'm taking that input. And those are the things that have driven internally, and now it's starting to drive our products externally. So, you've got investment. Our accounts, our bank accounts are fine. We're holding our own through this. What is a football team? A restructuring period. You put new players out there and they got to gel. I put new sales force out there and a sales methodology, and I've just disrupted that apple cart, so they've gotten used to it. So it's just focusing on our current base, and where you gain profitability and you grow is coming up with new products that you can market to your existing base. So you start to grow your revenue profitability and taking that in a portion and dedicating it towards research and development. My preference, though, is to find a customer that needs and wants something, get them to pay for it, and then becomes part of our product pool.
Beautiful. All right. Well, John, my final question for you here today, from what you can tell us, where would you like to see the company in 3 to 5 years? And what would you say are the inflection points that'll get you there?
That's a good question. Well, first I'll say I didn't come to the company not to grow. So I would say in 3 to 5, let's say in the next couple years, my goal is a $200 million company. That's my goal, with $50 million in net income. So I want to maintain over 20% of profitability. And what that means is being innovative on our product, making sure that we cover everything. So when you talk about the profitability and what we've done, let me explain something that we've done already, and we just keep that model in place. It's very odd that it happened this way, but it's true. A V300 average price is $300,000. That's 5 screens, 300 degrees, 300,000. Now, we've had them over $1 million based on what they buy, how many recoil kits, and did they want custom scenarios? What do they want? A V180 is 180 degrees, 3 screens, and that's 180,000. And a V100 is 1 screen, and that's about 100,000. Again, they'll go up and down based on that. So we have this where we have some of the 100s that are in the 60,000, maybe the 50,000 range. And so because of budgets in that, that's capital expense. We created the STEP program where you basically take those and divide them in 3s, except for the 100. So we still had this underserved market where they didn't have the space, they didn't have the budget, but they had that need for training. So we created the VXR, which is under 40,000. So now we've hit every level of budget, and we've hit both types of budget in a capital and operational budget with the STEP, right? So as we go forward, we have that same model. We keep an eye on where the gaps are in what we supply, and we fill that gap. And so that's kind of what we're doing. So we also internally, we've redone some of the systems that we have and saved on costs. So rather than raising prices, we've cut the cost significantly. So we're coming profitability through efficiencies and just good engineering and investigations on what can make us better. Keeping our eye on the ball. That's really what it is.
John, I lied. I got one more question for you. So, who is that? Because it's a relatively, you're creating a new industry in a lot of ways, right? In virtual training seminars specifically for military and police, right?
Okay.
So who's that $1 billion version of VirTra? I know it's safe to say obviously you guys want to be that, but who's that? I'm not saying that's your potential acquirer or anything like that, at this point, but who is that? Who do you aspire to be if you're looking and say, that's a company that is similar to kind of what we do ish, but I want to be there?
There are none. And I'm not being arrogant about it. There really aren't. I think there's a lot of, you had a company called Megit, and I worked with them with my previous company in winning, 2 largest military contracts. They were purchased by private equity, and they're very lumpy. They try to get into the law enforcement, but they spend a lot of money to just get small amounts of profit, and they're not going to dedicate all that. So the barrier to entry there is just the footprint that VirTra already has. I don't know. Like I said, the things that make changes is through acquisitions, and I only bolt on things that make sense for the company. We did that at the previous company. I kind of look at my supply chain and I go, all right, what risk will I have if this one goes away, if they're a single supplier? Maybe that's a bad example, but adjacent markets. I'll give you an example, an adjacent market that we chase. So we're in the healthcare now, school resource officers and education. There's a lot of emerging markets out there. So again, we can focus on what we do better than anything. I think the biggest challenge we have, there was 2 challenges we had. One, in the Northeast, the ceiling heights were so low. So again, we've got the VXR headset, but people still want that form, fit, and function, and getting into a scenario where 2 people are side by side, clearing a room, clearing a building, dealing with a hostage situation, de-escalating and going through that scenario. So then they had height space, right? Lower ceilings. So we've come up with a new way to mount trusses that's patented, and will be out on the market. It's available now. We're installing our very first one, and that's going to save money. Again, it's purposely built. New cameras in the market that are better than anybody else's, that was designed in the skunkworks methodology. Couple people with a vendor, and we built it from scratch. So those are the things that make a difference in the company to solidify our position, so that we can start spreading out and say, okay, what adjacent market can we do? What else do they need, right? So that's kind of the path. But to your question, honestly, there isn't anybody. I mean, there's companies I would like to be based on how they operate, their reputation, their delivery structure, that kind of thing. But in our space, there isn't one.
I think that's a great place to end it. That was kind of more or less what I was getting at. So with that, John, where can our audience go and find more information on VirTra?
VirTra.com. The one thing I will ask you is the next thing I'm working on is the website. I want it to be easier where you can find things. So if anybody has a suggestion, just leave it at info@virtra.com.
Beautiful. John, thank you so much for joining me today. Really do appreciate it. Good luck. Stay safe. And I look forward to our next update. And we're recording this on Tuesday, July 2nd. So happy 4th as well.
Thanks, Bobby. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not provided as financial, legal, or any other advice. The information is not investment advice or an offer to buy or sell any securities or make any investment. The views expressed by guest speakers are their own, and any reference to third-party products, services, or information does not constitute an endorsement thereof by SNN or its affiliates. SNN expressly disclaims all liability for any individual's use of the information presented in this podcast.